I don't know what's wrong with me. My head just doesn't work right.
Okay. Why doesn't it work right?
I don't know. I'll kick it.
All right.
On May 20, 1998, a 15-year-old boy, Kip Kinkel, commonly referred to as Kip, killed both of his parents in their home outside of Springfield, Oregon. The next day, he walked into Springfield's Thurston High School cafeteria and opened fire on the students present, killing 2 and wounding 25. In September 1998, Kip pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. And in November 1999, Kip was sentenced to over 111 years in prison, without possibility of parole. This severe ruling makes Kip the first juvenile to serve a life sentence in the state of Oregon. The case of Kip Kinkel marks a cautionary tale as to the signs of a deteriorating mental state. The general trend that follows in this story is apparent psychosis and a system of family and educational facilities that were in some ways not equipped and/or did not expect or appreciate the gradual escalation that came to be. And though the adults in contact with Kip may have had good intentions, at the same time, they showed a short-sightedness to the deeper underlying issues that undoubtedly required the intervention of medical expertise and treatment at an earlier stage in life. Furthermore, not unlike today, the stigma and lack of knowledge surrounding mental health and its implications are prevalent throughout this case.
What is your emergency?
This is Thurston High School. We have a gun on campus. There's someone shooting.
Kip Kinkel was no stranger to high expectations in life. His parents were both Spanish teachers, and his sister at the time had a full-ride scholarship to attend Hawaii Pacific University. Kip actually told one psychiatrist that, quote, "I had to be 100%. No one is perfect though. Lots of times, life sucked. With my parents, if I didn't do my best, I was an embarrassment to my parents," unquote. The lofty expectations undoubtedly weighed heavy on Kip. He was diagnosed with a learning disability in the 3rd grade, so that meant he had trouble with reading, writing, and even tying his shoes. His parents were aware of his issues and had him repeat the 1st grade due to what they called a lack of maturity and slow emotional and physical development. His sister recalled that he would study for hours and not pass, and said, quote, "In the 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade, I remember him studying for those spelling tests over and over. Of course, he felt bad about himself because he didn't understand what was wrong with him," unquote. Kip has been characterized as being hyperactive and likely to have extreme temper tantrums. But that's not all. From very early on, Kip exhibited extreme antisocial behavior and took a liking to guns and bombs. Eventually, he would become an active collector and would even make homemade bombs from instructions he would find on the internet. His parents responded by cutting his computer use. This marked the beginning of alarming behavior that seemingly went unchecked, or at best, swept under the rug, perhaps in hopes Kip would get better with time.
Okay, so he was having some trouble learning in school, but he was no dummy. Clearly, he's able to follow directions if he's able to make makeshift bombs. And how early are we talking about here when you said he was getting into guns early? How early are we talking?
So we're talking middle school leading up to high school.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty early.
Right, but his intelligence was not lacking. He would get good grades. It's just that early on, he had slowed development. A lot of kids go through this case. Just some people grow mentally, cognitively, at different levels.
Yeah, definitely.
And as we go back to the story and the alarming behavior that was exhibited early on, as evidence, the Kinkels' housekeeper of 7 years, Tammy Griswold, she actually quit after feeling too uncomfortable because of Kip's aberrant behavior and his tendency to set objects on fire. She repeatedly warned his parents about his activities, and their response was simply, "Thank you for telling us." Literally, that's a quote that the housekeeper told. And keeping on with this negative trajectory, in January of 1997, Kip was charged with kicking a large rock off a highway overpass. The rock ended up striking the front of a car passing below. Kip's mother's response was allegedly to help Kip memorize the Lord's Prayer. She thought it would be good for him. We can see so far the series of unchecked behavior. And we have much more on that later.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's still early in the story, so that I can't really pass any judgment on the parents, regardless of what part of the story we're on. But they're being very enabling at this point, on top of the fact that they're also pushing him in a way that doesn't seem effective.
Yeah, you and I grew up different ways. We would get reprimanded if we were doing any of these behaviors, but some parenting styles are obviously different.
For sure.
So during high school, Kip wrote on the top of a Spanish worksheet, quote, "I will hunt you down and put a hole in your head with explosives. You hear me? Power to the shampoo." He also wrote, quote, "You must die," next to a sad face that he had X'd the eyes out of. The teacher simply responded, "I'm concerned."
What is the teacher supposed to do in this situation?
Yeah, you are right. It's tough to assume the worst, but sometimes you just have to take precaution. Especially in this case, when we see clearly antisocial behavior exhibited, we should take precaution, especially in today's society, or in any society. But this was back in the late 90s. I think it would happen today, quite honestly. Our lack of appreciation for mental health is very apparent in how we treat and the protocol applied to citizens, students, everyone.
And I also think there's the situation that teachers are not psychological professionals, so they probably wouldn't know, or most teachers wouldn't know how to spot psychological or I guess antisocial behaviors right off the bat.
I would agree, but if someone's saying that I will hunt you down, put a hole in your head with explosives, yeah, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would hope that our society, in the national level, that we have the correct protocols to follow. We have psychologists that work and counselors that work at the school board. So maybe we can go through the correct channels to correct this situation. But I'll tell you a situation where the higher ups failed as well. So 3 weeks before the shooting occurred, Kip blurted out in class, quote, "God damn this voice inside my head," unquote. Kip also once made a bomb-making speech in class, and when his teacher told the school counselor, the counselor simply reassured that she had talked to Kinkel's father, and Kinkel's father knew everything about it. He knew about Kip's obsessions, so it wouldn't be anything to concern about.
Man, so here's more of these situations where I guess higher ups or people in some type of position of power or responsibility fail to take the necessary action.
On May 20, 1998, Kip brought $110 in cash to school to buy a stolen gun from another student. But this was not the first gun Kip had owned. His parents had purchased him others.
What the heck?
Yeah, I know, right? So he placed the gun he had just purchased from the student in his locker, where it was later discovered. Kip was arrested for possession of a firearm and was also expelled from school.
Yesterday you were involved in an incident where a gun was, you purchased a gun at school from Corey Ewart, and your dad came here to the Springfield Police Department and took you home after I was done. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to the earlier case with the gun that you bought from Corey. Why did you buy that gun? Remember why you bought the gun?
I don't know.
Did you buy it with the intention of hurting somebody?
No.
When you brought the gun to school yesterday, or when you purchased it yesterday, did you know that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do?
I knew it was the wrong thing.
You knew it was the wrong thing to do?
Yeah.
Okay. But you didn't have any intent yesterday, or at least that's what you told me yesterday, of hurting anybody. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Kip's father, Bill Kinkel, picked Kip up from the police station, and on their way home, they stopped at a Burger King. This was back in 1998. I always have to remind myself that, okay, yeah, there was a Burger King back then. I was alive too, so I'm always thinking back, wow, they had that back then? No, I was alive in 1998. I remember going to Burger King. But let's go back to the story.
I'm sure Burger King is much older than that even.
Very much so, but I'm very egocentric. I believe life started when I was born. So let's go back to the story. While they were sharing a meal inside, Kip's father looked in his direction and disappointedly uttered, quote, "You disgust me," unquote, and went to the car, leaving Kip to eat alone.
Now, around this time, are his parents aware of his schizophrenia diagnosis?
No, per se, but they are aware that there are severe psychological issues going on with him. I say no per se because the exact diagnosis had not come out at the time.
Yeah, okay, but still, they have an awareness, like you said, there's some type of mental health issue going on there. So they're just not dealing with it, or they're choosing not to deal with it in a manner that would be productive.
Yes, in a proactive manner is a good way of putting it. We'll talk about those implications further down the line. But let's continue on the story. So after they eat their meal, they drive back home.
So, when you got home with your dad, is Dad angry with you?
Yes.
Okay. And you left here just around noon, I believe. So, did you go straight home?
We stopped at Burger King.
You stopped at Burger King? Tell me what happens when you get home.
I had no other choice. I couldn't.
You were feeling really guilty.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at this point, the three command voices Kip had heard since 6th grade made an appearance. So remember, he's suffering from paranoid type schizophrenia. And as we mentioned in the intro, a symptom of that is auditory hallucinations. Kip claimed that the three voices commanded him to get the gun and shoot his dad. They allegedly said, quote, "Get your gun, shoot him, shoot him. Look at what you've done, you stupid piece of sugar honey iced tea. You're worthless, and kill him, shoot him. You have no choice," unquote. After Kip and his father returned home, Kip overheard his father on the phone with the Oregon National Guard, inquiring about his boot camp. It was at this point Kip grabbed a semi-automatic rifle and fired one shot into the back of his father's head, killing him.
I don't know what's wrong with me. My head just doesn't work right.
Why doesn't it work right?
I don't know. I'm kicking.
All right. So, was your dad, did he hit you or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Was he yelling or out of control or?
Yes, I couldn't let my... I had no other choice. God. I had no other choice. He was saying
He was saying all that stuff that he was kind of... He he was saying a lot of negative stuff about you? Like, what was he saying about you? Okay. He's mad at you because you got caught in school with a gun, right?
Right.
Okay.
And he's all his friends and everything knew my
Okay. So he was feeling ashamed and embarrassed because you did something wrong. Is that right? Okay.
I didn't want to. I love my dad, that's why.
You love him, so that's why you had to kill him? Okay. Earlier you told me you walked up behind him and shot him in the head. Is that right?
Basically, yeah.
Basically?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you stand away from him when you shot
Yeah.
him? How far were you from him when you shot him?
10 feet.
10 feet? And how many times did you shoot him?
One.
And where did that bullet hit him?
Right above the ear.
Right behind the ear?
Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Oh my God.
It's all right. So, your dad falls to the kitchen floor.
He just laid on the counter.
He laid on the counter. Then what did you do?
I didn't know what to do, so I dragged him into the bathroom and I put a white sheet over him.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Why did you move your dad's body into the bathroom?
I felt like I had to do something.
Did you move him so that Mom wouldn't walk in and see him?
I moved him because I was supposed to be on his back and I don't know.
Why did you cover him with a sheet?
It just felt like the right thing to do.
Okay. You did it out of respect for him? Okay. So what do you do from the time that you put the sheet over your dad and your mom comes home?
A few people called.
Do you remember who called?
Yeah, some of my friends. And I just talked to them. I didn't say anything about that. And I didn't know what to do because, oh my God, my mom was coming home and she knew what I had done. Oh my God.
I think my question, Kip, is, had your dad not said some pretty mean things to you, like, you know, he's embarrassed, your mom's going to be embarrassed, all our friends are going to be embarrassed. Had he not said those things, would there have been a different outcome?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
When his mother came home later, Kip killed her as well.
When did you decide in your mind that you had to kill your mom? Before you shot your dad or
Afterwards.
afterwards?
My dad could say how my mom was just, how embarrassed she was going to be and how horrible I was. And I couldn't let my mom feel like that. I couldn't do anything else. There's no other way.
There's probably at least 2 hours from the time you shot your dad until your mom got home.
Yeah.
What did you do to prepare yourself for having to shoot your mom?
I cried. I said I was so sorry. I had to, though. I had to.
You said you were waiting for her.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you waiting for her at?
In the living room so I could see when the car came up.
And when she pulled in the garage and the garage door came down and she got out of the garage, got out of her car. Where were you?
I don't know.
Were you hiding somewhere in the garage so that she had to walk past you?
So I came down and helped her with the bags. Bring them up.
Where was the gun at that point? On your hip?
Yeah.
And what kind of gun was that?
It was 22. Oh God.
Was it the 10-22 or was it the pistol? It was the pistol? Okay.
I just want to die.
I know.
Oh God.
So, you told me that your mom gets out of the Explorer and starts up the stairs from the garage or basement, is that right?
Yes.
Do you say anything to her?
Yes. I told her I loved her.
And you
God damn it, these bullets are behind my head!
all right, all right. Yep. Yep. Settle down. It's all right. It's all right. Just settle down, okay? All right, just settle down. Earlier you told me you shot her twice.
I shot her several times.
You shot her several times?
Because I dragged her out into the basement after I shot her. And she was still alive. And I said that I loved her. And I shot her. I shot her again. She would know that I killed her. Because of my mom.
Okay. So you didn't want your mom to know that you were the one that shot her?
Right.
Okay. And you love your mom? You shot your mom to save her the embarrassment and that sort of stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was that the right thing or the wrong thing to do?
I couldn't do anything else.
Okay.
So, all of this in the span of a day, him buying the gun, getting expelled, arrested, and killing his father all in one day.
Where was his sister?
So his sister, remember, his sister was off in college.
So she got lucky then.
Yeah, and it's crazy because she actually wrote a letter to the judge pleading with her brother saying he's not like this. He's such a great person. He's the most selfless person ever. So clearly she sympathizes with him even though he's done such horrible things. In an audio confession, Kip tearfully described to police how he almost ended his life with a pistol after killing his parents at the family home the night before.
Kip, let me ask you this. If you had it to do over again, what would you do?
I tried so hard to kill myself. I just kill myself. I can't do it. I don't want more than anything.
Instead, Kip spent the night in the house with the bodies.
So what did you do the rest of the night? Did you talk to any more friends?
Oh, it's just... I didn't know what to do. I held my Glock to my head. And I wanted to kill myself so bad. But I couldn't. I don't know why.
So did you get any sleep last night at all, or did you stay awake all night?
Stayed awake.
Okay. So, did you watch TV? What?
I turned on to keep me company, but I didn't watch it.
Okay.
Early the next morning, on May 21, 1998, Kip drove his mother's car to Thurston High School. Kip, dressed in a trench coat, filled his backpack with more than 1,200 rounds of ammunition. He had 2 handguns, a rifle, and taped a knife to his ankle beneath his pants. He also taped 2 bullets to his chest. He later told police that he taped those bullets to his chest so that if he ran out of ammunition, he could reload and kill himself.
You had planned to go to school, and you had taped some bullets to your chest. What were those bullets for?
To kill myself if I ran out of ammunition.
And
When Kip arrived at the school, he walks into a hallway and shoots 2 students, one of which would end up dying later at the hospital.
There's 2 students in the 2 in bad shape in the cafeteria.
Next, Kip walked into the cafeteria filled with over 200 students and starts firing.
What is your emergency?
This is Thurston High School. We have a gun on campus. There's someone shooting.
He shoots 57 shots, hitting 37 targets. He then walks over, puts the handgun to a student's head, and kills him. When he starts to reload his gun, he is tackled by 2 students. Several other boys hold him down until police arrive.
I took him down, started just punching him.
He looked at all of us actually and said, "Kill me, just kill me now."
People just running. Everybody's running everywhere.
He's one of these people that everybody thinks he's joking around about making bombs and modifying guns and stuff, but it turns out he wasn't lying.
When Kip was handcuffed, he told the arresting officer that he just wanted to die.
when we got here to the police department, you had a knife that the officers had missed strapped to your leg, right?
Right.
And you'd slipped your cuffs around to the front. And when I opened the door, you held that knife out and you charged me with that knife.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I want you to shoot me. I just want to die.
Was that the right thing or the wrong thing to do?
It has to be the right thing, because I need to die more than anything else.
In the end, Kip killed 2 students and wounded 25 others.
Why did you go to school and start shooting people?
I had to. I had no other choice. I couldn't do anything else.
Why did you feel that you didn't have a choice with the kids at school?
I don't know. I can't. I had to.
Did you know it was wrong to shoot your dad, your mom, and the kids at school?
I had no other choice. It was the only thing I could do.
Later that night, police would go back to Kip's home, where the bodies of his parents were left covered in a sheet. When detectives searched the Kinkel's home, they found explosives, fireworks, bomb-making books, several hundred rounds of ammunition, guns obviously, knives, a sword, more bombs, in this case a pipe bomb, hand grenades, more guns, and knife catalogs. And after stripping all of the insulation from crawl spaces and the attic, they found numerous hidden home explosives that he had tried to hide from his parents. Sitting on a coffee table in the living room sat a confession letter. It said, quote, "I have just killed my parents," ! Exclamation point. I don't know what is happening. I love my mom and dad so much. I just got 2 felonies on my record. My parents can't take that. Exclamation point. It would destroy them. The embarrassment would be too much for them. They couldn't live with themselves. I'm so sorry. I am a horrible son. I wish I had been aborted. I destroy everything I touch. My head just doesn't seem to work right. God damn these voices inside my head. I want to die. I want to be gone. But I have to kill people. I don't know why. I am so sorry. Why did God do this to me? I have never been happy. I wish I was happy. I wish I made my mother proud. I tried so hard to find happiness, but you know me, I hate everything. I have no other choice. I am so sorry.
That was so chilling and revealing.
And a common theme of the altruistic killer.
That was the next thing I was going to say. It seems to be a recurring thing that the killer always kills someone who's close to them in a sense of trying to put them out of a misery or trying to save them from something. At least that's what they think to themselves. And then there's always that aspect of self-deprecation where they feel like they're damaged goods, probably because at some point in their lives, someone who really cared about them told them something to make them feel that way. And the thought of just not wanting to live anymore.
He said more. Investigators also found a journal in Kip's bedroom. And I'm sorry, I find these things insightful, getting inside the mind of a killer. I think we all do. That's why we're doing the show. And you guys are listeners, obviously. And I'm a listener of crime shows as well. An excerpt from the journal said, quote, I sit here all alone. I am always alone. I don't know who I am. I want to be something I can never be. I try so hard every day, but in the end, I hate myself for what I've become. Every single person I know means nothing to me. I hate every person on this earth. I wish they could all go away. You all make me sick. I wish I was dead. The only reason I stay alive is because of hope. Even though I am repulsive and few people know who I am, I still feel that things might, maybe, just a little bit, get better. I don't understand any effing person on this earth. Some of you are so weak, mainly that a 4-year-old could push you down. I am strong, but my head just doesn't work right. I know I should be happy with what I have, but I hate living. Every time I talk to her, and I believe he's referring to her as a female in his class. Every time I talk to her, I have a small amount of hope. But then she will tear it right down. It feels like my heart is breaking. But is that possible? I am so consumed with hate all the time. Could I ever love anyone? I have feelings, but do I have a heart that's not black and full of animosity? ? I know everyone thinks this way sometimes, but I am so full of rage that I feel I could snap at any moment. I think about it every day. Blowing the school up or just taking the easy way out and walk into a pep assembly with guns. In either case, people that are breathing will stop breathing. That is how I will repay all of you mother effers for all you put me through. I feel like everyone is against me, but no one ever makes fun of me, mainly because they think I am a psycho. There is one kid above all others that I want to kill. I want nothing more than to put a hole in his head. The one reason I don't, hope. That tomorrow will be better. As soon as my hope is gone, people die. I ask myself why I hate more than anyone else. I don't know. But my head and heart want him dead. He only knows who I am through reputation. And I know he is scared of me. He should be. One bad day, and there will be a sawed-off shotgun in his face or 5 pounds of Simtex under his bed. I need help. There is one person that could help, and this is not me paraphrasing. This is all in one line. There is one person that could help, but she won't. I need to find someone else. I think I love her, but she could never love me. I don't know why I try. Oh, F. I sound so pitiful. People would laugh at this if they read it. I hate being laughed at, but they won't laugh after they're scraping parts of their parents, sisters, brothers, and friends from the wall of my hate. Please, someone help me. All I want is something small, nothing big. I just want to be happy. End. New day. Today of all days, I asked her to help me. I was shot down. I feel like my heart has been ripped open and ripped apart. Right now, I'm drunk, so I don't know what the hell is happening to me. It is clear that no one will help me. Oh God, I am so close to killing people. So close. I gave her all I have, and she just threw it away. Why? Why did God just want me to be in complete misery? I need to find more weapons. My parents are trying to take away some of my guns. My guns are the only things that haven't stabbed me in the back. My eyes hurt. They hurt so bad. They feel like they are trying to crawl out of my head. Why aren't I normal? Help me. No one will. I will kill every last mother effing one of you. The thought of you is still racing in my head. I am too drunk to make sense. Every time I see your face, my heart is shot with an arrow. I think she will say yes, but she doesn't, does she? She says, quote, I don't know. The 3 most effed up words in the English language. I want you to feel this, be this, taste this, kill this, kill me. Oh God, I don't want to live. Will I see it to the end? What kind of dad would I make? All humans are evil. I just want to end the world of evil. I don't want to see, hear, speak, or feel evil, but I can't help it. I am evil. I want to kill and give pain without a cause. And there is no such thing. Anyone that believes in God is a effing sheep. If there was a God, he wouldn't let me feel the way I do. Love isn't real. Only hate remains. Only hate.
Okay, so that was a lot to process there, but one of the first things that came to mind was, man, he was a dangerous person from the get-go, because not only did he not care about others, he didn't care about himself either. He literally had nothing to lose. And the entire time you were reading, I couldn't help but think, this sounds a lot like the voices in his head being put on paper. Because initially he would speak about hope, which he didn't seem to have too much of, and he would seem to be crying out to God, and then in the end he just basically said there is no God. So he was between, and I'm not sure how schizophrenia work, obviously.
A symptom of that is disorganized speech and thought patterns.
Right, exactly, and that's where I was going with it.
Yeah, so we had a lot of that going on. And a lot of it was self-persecution. It's like you refer to it as self-deprecation. And he feels like, in terms of self-persecution, he feels like the world is against him. They did this to him. Why did they do this to him? You all have to pay. And
imagine having that huge burden of being that one person that can help, quote unquote. So the girl that he liked, granted that she probably didn't know of this beforehand, and I'm not sure what exactly he did to let her know about it, but the burden of being the person who could have, quote unquote, helped, that's a huge responsibility.
And I don't know if that would have helped. He seemed so self-destructive that he would have found a way or reason to self-destruct everyone around him as well.
That's a good point.
And he mentioned that she said that, I don't know, in terms of his request. That's every young girl's response.
Right.
Or most young girls' response, right? They're sort of, they want you to chase them. They're not really definitive in their answers unless they really, really like you. But for him, he feels like it's another slight. He felt like everyone's against him already. Maybe she's the only one that could save me, as you mentioned. And in this case, it's just another slight towards human beings.
Like, imagine being that unlucky guy that he hates for no reason.
Yeah. And you're just caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
Or you could just be a random bystander.
Exactly.
A guy like that, it's tough to even rationalize his actions.
A ticking time bomb, if you will, but
from very early on, as we will see in the future.
Yeah, and he was very sporadic.
And I want to read some more excerpts from his personal journal. He had some more illuminating things in relation to his antisocial mental state. He wrote a piece entitled, "Love Sucks." No, I don't believe in love at first sight because love is an evil plot to make people buy alcohol and firearms. When you love someone, it is always taken away from you. I also would like to add that, like he has an audience, I also would like to add that I hate each and every one of you because everything I touch turns to sugar honey iced tea. I think if you think you fall in love with someone at first sight, it might just be lust. Love at first sight is only in movies, where the people in the movies are better than you. That is why you go to a pawn shop and buy an AK-15, because you are going to execute every last mother effing one of you. If I had a heart, it would be gray. It is easier to hate than love, because there is so much hate and misery in the world than there is love and peace. Some people say that you should love everyone, but that is impossible. Look at our history. It is full of death, depression, rape, wars, and diseases. I also do not believe in love at first sight, as if he hasn't said that so far. But I do believe in hate at first sight. Therefore, love is a much harder feeling to experience. I really wouldn't know how to answer this question because my cold black heart has never and never will experience true love. I can tell you one thing about love. It does more harm than good. I plan to live in a big black hole. My firearms will be the only thing to fight my isolation. I would also like to point out love is a horrible thing. It makes things kill and hate. Unquote.
Okay, so now that poem just makes me lean more towards that girl probably wouldn't be able to save him, like you said.
Oh, no.
Maybe because he's never actually experienced love, and I don't mean in a relationship way. I mean, maybe he felt like no one ever really truly loved him. And so the whole concept or notion of love is so foreign to him, he doesn't believe it exists.
Right. He doesn't have the capacity to experience love because his parents did show him love. His parents were very caring, but he doesn't have the capacity. I remember in one instance, he got mad because his parents gave his sister the third family car, because she was going off to college. He got mad. Like, why would you give her the car? I'm about to turn 16, 17 and get my license. Why would you give her the car? And they assured him that by the time he would be of driving age, he would have the car back. But as I mentioned before, he has a self-prosecution mindset that every slight is against him, and he takes it to heart. And these are typical antisocial behavior. Most people, when they think antisocial, they think of it wrongly. Sorry, guys. But the antisocial we think of in a generic sense, we in terms of general society, we think of it as someone that is asocial. He is more reclusive than anything. He's more of a homebody. He doesn't really have a lot of friends. He doesn't go out. That's more so asocial, or he's just not a talkative person. Antisocial is everything we've exhibited and seen from our guy Kip, in which they feel prosecution against society and they hate society and they want to exact revenge against society.
Right, so the world is against them.
Yes, precisely. What makes Kip Kinkel's case of particular significance is the vast amount of details on Kip's mental state. Due to the openness of the trial, and perhaps of more interest, the fact that less than a year prior to his murderous rampage, Kip and his mother were frequently visiting a psychiatrist, one who would eventually testify in court and, better yet, reveal his treatment session notes, which sheds light into the mental state of Kip. And as I researched this case, the pervasive question that came to mind was, why weren't Kip's issues never addressed? Because his parents knew about the issues. And why were they addressed so late?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Even more so because, and I think this is an issue today as well, the Oregon school system and school systems in America, I believe, we are lacking any viable options in counseling and psychologists. In fact, I read papers where the psychologists were overloaded due to budget constraints. I don't think that should ever be an excuse, but that is always the case in a lot of instances. But beyond the school system failing mental health wise, and thank God we are so weary of mental health today, but nonetheless, he did seek treatment with his mother. From January 20 to the 30th of 1997, at the age of 14, Kip received his first psychological treatment. And he was brought into treatment by his mother, Faith Kinkel. His mother stated that she was seeking psychological consultation to help Kip learn more appropriate ways and measures of managing his anger and to reduce or manage his antisocial acting out. Dr. Hicks, who's the psychiatrist that worked with Kip, he met with Kip and his mother 9 times, about once every 3 weeks. Each session would be accompanied by his mother. Faith Kinkel mentioned Kip's fascination with explosives, guns, and knives, an interest that was actually shared by several of his friends. His mother was obviously concerned on the unhealthy nature of his fascinations and worried that it may lead to behaviors that could harm Kip or others.
But by this time, his parents were already buying him guns, right? So what is it really? It's kind of confusing.
Some cultures are different. I don't want to judge the cultures, but some cultures, they do prepare and train their children early with guns. And it is said that Kip's father used that as a way to bond. He also encouraged Kip to join the football team, but Kip was about 120 pounds and that didn't really work out.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm not saying that the buying him the guns was a bad thing. It's buying him the guns with the knowledge of his mental instability.
Now that I would agree on. And of course, when we have kids in general, but let's talk Kip. Kip would often lie to his parents about his interest in explosives. It got so bad that his parents would no longer even leave him home alone. They didn't trust him.
But apparently trust him enough to buy more guns?
During their consultations, she also described Kip of being emotional and having a hot temper, sometimes kicking holes in the walls at the home. And Kip would actually end up endorsing everything his mother mentioned. He mentioned to Dr. Hicks that he often feels angry and that he makes explosives from gasoline and other household items and detonates them at a nearby quarry to vent feelings of anger. And if he was having a bad day at school, he would feel better after detonating explosives. He was also no stranger to getting into legal trouble. He was caught shoplifting CDs from Target and was arrested, as we mentioned earlier, for kicking rocks off in an overpass at passing cars. During these sessions, he revealed he had been suspended on a couple of occasions. One for kicking a peer in the head after the boy had shoved him. And another time for, and this is all within a week, and another time for throwing a pencil at another boy. Dr. Hicks identified major depression symptoms in Kip and wrote that he thought Kip's depression continued to interfere with his emotional functioning. On June 6th of 1997, Kip was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant. In their final session, Kip and his mother felt that he had made sufficient progress and at this point he could manage things. He also later mentioned that the Prozac was effective at alleviating the voices in his head and reducing the stress levels he felt. He characterized the summer he was in therapy and on Prozac as a wonderful time and the best summer ever. Altogether, they ended up discontinuing their consultation with Dr. Hicks because they felt he was in a better state. Unfortunately, though, shortly after Kip's discontinuation of psychotherapy and medication, he predictably returned to his depressed state. This is not at all uncommon, though. According to research, around 60% of schizophrenic patients stop the treatment after 2 to 3 months without the consultation with the physician. And after 2 years, 80% of schizophrenic patients discontinue treatment altogether. And I think it's also worth mentioning that after doing some research, I found that the recommendations for treatment with major depression in regards to Prozac is at least 9 months. Kip was on the drug for only 3 months or so. And worst of all, after falling into that state of depression, the Kinkels never contacted Dr. Hicks again. And mind you, this was less than a year from the murderous rampage that Kip had gone on. And even worse, perhaps so, it was during this time on June 30th, 1997, that Kip's father went out and bought Kip a Glock handgun. We haven't mentioned his father much, but Kip's relationship with his father was complex to say the least.
Yeah, I kind of gathered that Kip and his father's relationship was more on the rocky side, given some of the things that you mentioned earlier.
And I don't think too many people would be on Kip's good side, as we noted in his journal.
That's a very valid point.
But we have some specific instances. During consultation, anytime he mentioned his relationship with his father, he became tearful. He mentioned that his mother views him as a good kid with some bad habits, while his father sees him as a bad kid with bad habits. When asked with whom he would discuss personal issues with, he identified friends and, to a lesser degree, his mother, but he would never think of discussing his feelings with his father, for fear he would become angry with him. Kip told Dr. Hicks that his father was not supportive of counseling because of the expenses and the belief that it was not helpful at all. In fact, Kristen, Kip's sister, verified Kip's statement. She said, quote, "My dad wasn't too excited about it. He felt that psychologists were like chiropractors, in the sense that they may not be as heavily needed as we think." And his mother, Faith Kinkel, also backed this statement and told Dr. Hicks that Kip's father was not in favor of counseling, did not think it would be helpful, and did not want to participate. So that's why it was only his mother and Kip going to these counseling appointments. And perhaps something even more illuminating came from an interview by a friend of Bill Kinkel's by the name of Corey Taggart, who stated in an interview that Bill had talked to him about Kip's condition, saying, quote, "Bill's voice was low. He said he had just found out his son was clinically depressed." "What's going on?" he asked. "I don't understand what this is all about." He seemed sort of confused, unquote.
Yeah, so this says a lot to how mental health was perceived, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah. And that's the stigma behind mental health. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. The stigma behind mental health. You're inferior, you're weak, you're an outcast. So a lot of times people push it aside, even if it's their kid, and they just brush it under the rug.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm starting to notice more is parents seem to find it to be an embarrassment back then.
Oh yeah, I would say to this day.
That's unfortunate.
It was not just Bill Kinkel though. Perhaps in some way or another, it may have even been Faith Kinkel Kip's mother as well. During the early consultations with Dr. Hicks, Faith mentioned that there was no family history of mental health illnesses. This was in fact incorrect. Whether she was hiding it or denying it remains unknown. Dr. William Sack, a psychiatrist who evaluated Kip and testified at his sentencing hearing, reviewed data from Kip's family history of mental illness. And he would testify that his diagnosis of Kip was, quote, substantiated by the fact that this boy had some genetic loading that moved him towards a psychotic process. He had major mental illness on both sides of his family tree, unquote. In addition, Joyce Nafziger, a private investigator who was hired by the defense during trial, spent about a year and a half conducting research on the genetic history of Kip's family. Joyce actually would uncover countless amounts of mentally ill individuals down both sides of Kip's lineage. On Faith Kinkel's side of the family, at least 30 mentally ill individuals were either diagnosed with or presented identifiable signs of mental illnesses. More compelling is the fact that this number includes both of Faith's parents, all 3 of Faith's sisters, and Faith herself. In fact, Faith had been treated by her family physician in 1981 and in 1987, according to medical records. So apparently when Faith told Dr. Hicks that there was no signs of mental illness in her family, that seems to be a big folly because Dr. Hicks may have been able to take appropriate measures if he knew of the family history. I'm not sure if that would have made a difference, but obviously in this case, we'll never know.
Yeah, well, she seemed like she was very adamant on hiding this truth about her family history. And again, she was just very ashamed, it seems like, of the fact that her lineage had mental health issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very pervasive thought within our culture and how we look at mentally ill individuals. And on top of that, a lot of people don't know the significance of family history in terms of mental illnesses. We know we get asked that question every time we visit the doctor, but a lot of people don't know the significance of that question. I think it's up to healthcare professionals to have the patients understand the significance of that question. Now, if we take a closer look at Bill Kinkel's side of the family, at least 7 individuals who were either diagnosed with or presented with clinical symptoms of mental illness were identified. Although Bill himself had no history of treatment for mental illness. Now, that may not be saying much based on, as we previously mentioned, his thoughts of the ineffectiveness, perhaps so, of psychologists, comparing them once to chiropractors.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like even if he felt like he had an issue, or even if he knew that he had an issue, he probably would have opted to not see a doctor about it in the first place.
That's the masculine society we live in. We like to hide our pain, maybe even drink our pain away, and just tough it out. As we go back to the story, perhaps even more calamitous, Joyce Nafziger also confirmed that at least 9 of Kip's relatives had been institutionalized for mental illness. So we first talked about perhaps his father hiding any signs of mental illness or trying to push it away, for lack of better terms. We also talked about his mother being negligent on mental illness and the family history of mental illness. Now we talk about Kip. Kip himself did his best to hide any signs of mental illness to the public in apparent fear for any type of subsequent stigmatization. While incarcerated, Kip reported to 3 different psychologists, as we mentioned earlier, that he had been hearing 3 command voices from the time of the 6th grade.
And let's not forget about the time you mentioned he randomly blurted out, "Get out of my head," in class, or something of that nature.
Yeah, and we know how embarrassing school can be at that age. So for him to scream that out, That means the voices must have been very loud and very unbearable, as one can assume. While incarcerated, he also did a clinical interview. In that interview, he disclosed, and I'll read this short excerpt. Quote, "I thought maybe others heard voices too, but never talked about it. Sort of like masturbation. It's something I don't want to talk about. I decided not to tell anyone about it. I didn't want anyone to think I was nuts. I didn't want to go to a mental hospital." This speaks to the stigmatization of mental health and how we consider it. He thought all the way to the polar extreme of crazy. And that sort of lends to the theme I'm trying to allude to throughout this episode with mental health, with how it's viewed in the public back then. And I would say to this day, we haven't made much progress, but we've made some considerable progress compared to yesteryear. Back to the statement. He went on to say, "I didn't want my friends to know because that would end my friendships. I really didn't want any girls to know because they wouldn't want to be seen with me. My parents might think I was nuts. They'd be disappointed in me. I'd be ostracized." I mean, it's easy to say this is all in his head, but I feel like this is the pervasive notion of mental health and how we subtly ostracize them.
I mean, it's in your face all the time. Think about movies and shows. Just to name a few. Let me see: American Horror Story Asylum, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. What's Joker, Shutter Island? All of these movies, right? All we see are people in an asylum in a straitjacket being subdued with drugs, and essentially people look down upon that now because of how they're portrayed in movies, and that's not necessarily what mental health is to everyone. But you said it earlier, a lot of people's minds just go to the extreme when it comes to mental health, and it just goes right to the place of being in a straitjacket in an asylum in a room with padded walls.
And even more profoundly is they just want to be treated normal. They don't want to be treated any differently. They just want to be part of a normal society as we all are. Think back at his greatest fears. It was all coming from a sociological perspective. He didn't want to lose his friends. He didn't want his parents to think that he was crazy. And he didn't even want the girls to be ashamed to be around him.
Yeah, no one wants to be that. No one wants to be considered an outcast per se, because as you mentioned, people just will treat you differently.
Oh yeah, and it's the worst type of way you can be looked at, where you're looked at as a crazy.
Right.
He finished the interview by saying, "If my dad would have found out about the voices, it would have been like telling him I was gay, a mental." He went directly to something that was also very harshly criticized and stigmatized within the male culture. He finished by saying, "I cried when he gave me medicine." That's referring to the Prozac he was prescribed. "Because it meant he knew I was crazy, and now everybody would know. He figured me out. Splotch on my record. No one would ever hire me." Unquote.
It's tough to hear that, because even though it was back then, you can see and you can just hear how much people thought that having a mental disability, or mental illness rather, was a death sentence almost. A death sentence in terms of how you're going to be perceived, your reputation, your life, when that's not usually the case.
And it's a life that you're born in. But obviously, and we'll talk about this in the next section, it can be helped, the condition that is, with medication and treatment. But in that same lens, medicine and treatment is stigmatized as well. If you're undergoing treatment, then surely something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
So a lot of times with these individuals, that actually hinders their prognosis because of the stigmatization attributed to medication.
Besides the fact that Kip's parents stopped taking him to treatment after 3 months, I wonder if he would be less receptive to taking treatment after having this notion that being treated is a negative thing.
Right, I'm sure that will change. And that will change not only for him, because as I mentioned with the stat, I forget the exact number, but it's around 80% that relapse and stop taking medication altogether. So this is a common theme that is not only specific to Kip. Another great aspect of this case is during trial, we got to hear from several doctors that spoke on behalf of Kip's mental state and his brain abnormalities, of which may have spoken to the actions that occurred that day. Dr. Richard Kinkel, who's a renowned pediatric neurologist, conducted several neurological examinations of Kip, and he found that he had several brain abnormalities, mentioning in trial that these abnormalities would rise to the level that would cause some type of cognitive defect. And yet worse, these defects may lead to a psychotic episode. Among other things, the scan revealed a lesion in his prefrontal lobe. During trial, Dr. Kinkel mentioned that lesions at this particular region would cause deficits in executive functioning. So if you aren't too familiar with executive functioning, that deals with anything along the realms of strategizing, planning, making choices, and it also has to deal with impulse control. Prominently, we see a lot of these brain abnormalities within serial killers. There was also damage in the temporal lobe. Dr. Kinkel made note that damages at this particular region results in emotional instability, distortion of sensory perceptions, illusions, and delusions, which can be attributed to the auditory hallucinations that have occurred since the 6th grade, according to Kip. And perhaps more disheartening is the fact that Dr. Kinkel testified in court that there was at least a 75% to 90% chance that he would have a positive outcome if he was given treatment.
Wow.
So obviously in this case, we could have saved a lot of lives if the proper protocol was taken. Dr. Orrin Balstad, who was a clinical child psychologist, testified that he was certain Kip had a psychotic disorder with profound paranoid symptoms, as we obviously mentioned throughout this episode. Dr. Balstad also found that Kip had a lot of features in common with schizoaffective disorder. This disorder is a combination of schizophrenia and depression. We've noted his lack of affect and flat affect in many instances throughout his readings, especially. He also made mention that he had signs of bipolar manic disorder. He noted in court that he was pretty confident that Kip was psychotic. Dr. Balstad also mentioned that the symptoms Kip experienced, including the hallucinations and the command voices, were consistent with paranoid type schizophrenia. He distinguished the paranoid type of schizophrenia, characterized by the presence of prominent delusions or hallucinations in the context of a relative preservation of cognitive functioning and affect. So to put it in layman terms, he still had his cognitive functioning, meaning he was able to function as a regular person in the educational system, and he also still relatively had his affect or emotions. He could have normal emotions or maybe fake normal emotions. So with that said, the paranoid type of schizophrenia can be easily distinguishable from the other types of schizophrenia. Most people, when they think schizophrenia, they think he's walking down the street looking like a crazy guy talking to himself. To further that point, he would also testify that people with this type of schizophrenia could look rather normal most of the time. He also indicated that their behavior can be playful and that they can premeditate. This is essentially how a lot of school shooters fly under the radar until obviously they attack. He then said they can plan out a course of action and can complete it, but that does not mean that they're thinking logically. While their actions can be intentional, premeditated, and planful, they are all twisted, illogical, and irrational. And before we end, I want to illustrate a profound description by Dr. William Sack, who was a child and adolescent psychiatrist, In describing Kip's condition, he stated, quote, "The tragedy of his illness is that on the one hand, it allowed him to plan in a methodical way because his cognitive structures were relatively intact compared to other forms of schizophrenia. I think our common notion of schizophrenia is a disheveled person walking down the street, talking incoherently. That is schizophrenia, but we're talking about a different kettle of fish. This is paranoid schizophrenia. These people could look very normal. So on one hand, the illness had caused them to commit these tragedies. Also, it's the illness that responds better to treatment and has a better prognosis in general than the other forms of schizophrenia. That's the ironic tragedy of the whole thing." Unquote.
Can I get you anything? You want some water? Okay. Let me just turn the tape recorder off again. The time is at 10:36 a.m.